Once again, I'm kind of cheap. And so one little trick that I learned that's really cheap is Vaseline. If I don't want it to stick, which I forgot to bring it, I'll put Vaseline on the inside of the ring and on the bushings, and then your CA doesn't stick to it. But with the black ceramic, the CA won't stick to it. That's another reason I love it. I mean, you can take your fingernail and just chip it off, whereas even the titanium, even though it's smooth, it'll still stick, and then I have to get like a sharp tool and very carefully take it off. What? I don't need it, but thank you. Sorry. I got distracted. Okay, so for the wire, I'll go ahead and use my trusty tweezers, and I'll go ahead and start pushing it all the way around. I use the tweezers to press it and hold that shape. This is why I like dead soft wire. Actually, before I do this, I want to get all my tools so I don't screw this up and then have to do it over again. But I'll hold it in place with one side, and I'll use the tweezers and press it in. I'm sure there's better tools, but these are really junky tweezers, so they have no other use in my life. And then I'll use my file, the little thin sharp edge, and I'll see where the wire meets up here, and I'll go a little bit over because it never fails. You're going to have a catch, and you're going to have to file that off. But I'll get it until I can actually see a mark. Nope. I start cutting it at slants, and you could always see a space. But whenever I cut it perfectly straight, which is what I shall do, this is a jeweler's saw, and it's all of $14 with, I think it had 100 or so blades that came with it. And so this is an awesome investment. Oh, everything's on Amazon. 99% of what I get is on Amazon. I don't trust some of the stone suppliers because I've read the reviews and some of them say it's colored glass. And so it's like, I do try to get my stones from somewhere that I know it's going to be stone. And the wires, a lot of times I'll get on Amazon still because, I mean, if they have certificates that saying this, I mean, it's hard. I mean, pure copper's cheap. That's not a big deal. Sterling silver, I make sure that there is some kind of guarantee it is pure silver. For gold, I haven't ordered gold because it is so expensive, but I would go to a reputable dealer for that. I think they did have some dead soft, but if y'all can see me over here, hopefully I don't knock anything off here. Let's see if I can, okay, there's my mark. So this ring is huge. And I will clamp it down as good as this little bitty clamp can do anyways. Bear with me, this is not a nice clamp, but like I said, I needed something for this. And it's way smaller than I thought too, it looked bigger, but that's Amazon for you. And I will, like I said, this one's kind of junky, I will keep my blade square or as perpendicular as I can to my clamp. And I will just cut it off. And I've learned don't push too hard because this dead soft wire just bends and then you don't get a straight cut. And that's all it took. Let's see if I don't drop this and lose it. Yes. And then what I'll do, I like this file because it's curved on top. I'll take it and I'll put it in here because I want to file the top of it. It's not fitting very well, so please give me a few moments to get this. I want just the very tip top poking through to get it absolutely flat as I possibly can. Yep. Well, and for the smaller diameter rings, you might actually put a little bit of a angle on it. But this is such a big ring, it won't need much of an angle. But the smaller the angle, I mean, it's just like doing segmenting on a bowl or something. You're going to need something so it matches up perfectly. But this ring is like enormous, so I'll put the other side in, get both sides flush, which my other vise I've used this so much that I've actually filed it flat. Do what? I'm sorry, what? Yes. Yeah, I've started out with rings. That was my very first thing. I've moved on to pins. With Sam's help, I did a bowl. So I'm slowly getting bigger. Slowly. But while I have it on here, after I make sure there aren't any points, which it just fell down because this vise is very, very cheap. I apologize for this, guys. And then I'll go ahead and I'll take my little file and I will cut I'll scratch up all of the inside curve. Give that glue something extra to stick to. I didn't start out doing it, but when you're starting to file it and it pops off, that gets a little frustrating because by then it's probably too thin to put back on. And I pay special attention to the ends because you need those to really stick well because that's what's going to catch if anything catches. Which is just kind of my example ring. So I'm going to rush through this part a little bit more for y'all. And this is another part where you're careful on your measurement and you have to sneak up on how far you get it. Because I did do it too big. And not in an acknowledgement that I'll probably have a little... yes, thank you. Yeah, sorry. And so I try to gauge how much overlap I did have and have just that much sticking up. And I really don't recommend buying a $5 clamp vise because they're not good. And you get what you pay for. That's all I can say. And there's been times I swear I've gone back and forth to this like 10 times before I get the perfect fit. Because if there's any gap, it's going to be noticeable. So I'll keep testing. And I don't have it perfectly flat, so that's another thing I need to take down. There's a little bit of an angle on this one, which I think I'll blame my vise. But then I get, whenever I've gotten irritated, like this is taking way too long, and I take more off than I need, well then I have to start over. And I hate starting over once you get so far along and put all that work in. But I have saved the wires I've gotten too short because, especially when you get a ring this big, it's going to fit something else eventually. The little wires, it might be kind of a lost cause. These I discount. This is actually made with cross-arm wood, which I wear a respirator for because it is treated. But I make these for electrical linemen. And so my normal price for a custom ring is $160. Okay, I found it. We're good. Found it. My normal price is $160, but for linemen and first responders, my base price is $140. And women's and men's, I do the same price because I do the same amount of work. And the materials don't, the ring cores don't vary, and the men's or women's with it being thinner. And I still have to use a full ring blank, so it's not like I'm using fewer materials per se. And a few millimeters off a wire, or I don't know, about probably 1/10 of an ounce of stones. It's so little, it's just the same price all the way across the board for me. And sometimes the smaller ones are even more tedious. Okay, I finally got it. And one little secret I learned whenever you're putting the wire in to help hide if there is anything that's going to show it the connection is on this kind of wood in particular, it has stripes. So I'll find a particularly dark stripe, and that's where I'm going to connect the ends. Because then the eye's not really drawn to look for that. Whereas if you have it in a more open spot where there's no, grain or anything, then it's more noticeable. The eye's drawn to that separation. If that makes any sense, I hope it does. In my mind, it makes sense anyways. And then because I have glued my fingers and my gloves to this many times, I will use tweezers to hold it. And just a tiny, tiny drop of CA. That was a little bit more than a tiny drop, but do a tiny drop if you can. And then I hold it for a few seconds because, like I said, my accelerator does not work well, and it turns it white, and then that's really frustrating whenever you have a dark ring and you have this bright white cloudiness. Yes. And then it usually pops off pretty easy. One thing I did forget to mention is whenever I'm cutting the grooves on both sides, I test the wire on both sides because there's nothing like getting one side that's shallower than the other, because then your wire thicknesses aren't going to match up. Because whenever you file it flush, if it's halfway, like I said, it's going to be at its widest. If you have it shallower, then you're going to go past halfway and it's going to start narrowing down again. And so that is, you wouldn't think it's noticeable, but it really is. Your eyes are drawn to any inconsistencies. And while I don't know if my customers would notice, I notice, so I assume they do too. And that'd be the worst thing in the world if you're running a business only to find out that, hey, you screwed this up. Once I'm pretty sure that this is set, I'm not going to touch it because I don't want to glue my gloves to this. I only brought one. I'll go about halfway, another little dab of CA, and start pressing this wire in. And it pops out. And just hold it until it's kicked again. And it looks like I'm still a tiny bit over because I was impatient. And so I won't push it all the way to meet up because I am overlapping a tiny bit. And it's not a big deal, thankfully, because the first couple times I worried about that. But once it's set, just personal preference, I have these big old tweezers. And I'll pull the wire slightly off to a side and file very carefully. Try not to hit the wood or the other wire until it does fit. Some people do this from the start, and I can't stand that because then I have to file way too much because I always leave too much. Honestly, it's probably Amazon. I honestly don't remember, but if I was to guess, I would say Amazon. But you can get, I mean, it could have been Home Depot. You can get those little files just about anywhere. And it still doesn't match up quite yet. I apologize about that, guys. I was in a little bit of a hurry. And whenever I'm doing this with the tweezers, I try to hold them to maintain that same angle. Because if you just try to start filing away, you're going to get off at an angle and you're going to have a gap. Which, if you use copper, you can get fine copper powder and it's really cheap. And you can fill in that gap and it's barely noticeable. Discovered that one too. But I prefer to get an absolutely perfect match if possible. And so much of what I do is just tedious and time consuming, so I know it's not the most exciting thing to watch, which is why I didn't do a ring start to finish, because I am very slow when I'm turning too. So. And I use an air compressor for just about all of this. I'm so spoiled with them. Okay, now I have a perfect lineup, so I'll go ahead and do my final dab of CA. And this is where I really press it down hard, because if you have one side higher than the other, when you start filing, it can catch and just rip it all off. And whenever I do start filing, which thankfully I did bring it, you don't want to press hard, because if you press hard, once again, it's going to rip it off. You just use light pressure until it's pretty smooth. And sometimes, because like I said, my old lathe, it wasn't perfectly centered, I would get I think it was 120 or 150 grit sandpaper, and then I would sand it because I'd have it perfectly smooth on part of it, and then another small part would be raised. And you want it all to be just flush. Okay. Oh, yeah, I don't do this when he's awake. Most of my work schedule is from the time my kiddo's in bed at night until about midnight, or when my mom will watch him for me, and then those are my work days. But yes, I do not try to work with him because, yeah, and as he's dabbing it and gluing his hands together, oh yeah, I can see how well that would go with a 4-year-old. I think I'll pass on that one. But you know, there's a wood turning app they have, and he loves it, which I'd recommend it for all of y'all. If you're bored, you know, and you kind of miss turning, you can just turn on the app and Heck, you can even try to, turn their little shapes and try to get 100%, and he likes it. Heck, I enjoy it. Okay. They are not offset. They're at the same spot. They're perfectly, like if the back of my hands where the wire's extended out, they're perfectly flush like this. Because I tried layering them. Oh, on both sides. I try to, usually, but on this one, I didn't because they're both matched up so well you can't really tell. But I always try to get it in some of the grain so that your eyes aren't drawn to that separation. But now, yes. Yes. Well, that's one of the things I tell my customers is I need their ring size, and then all of my rings have cores because I've seen them all wood or I've seen them resin, and I'm not willing to guarantee it won't break or even antler because once you get them so thin to where it's comfortable, there's just no strength. And so I'll tell my customer they need to give me a ring size. I'll order the core, and then I just fit it to each person. I try to get as thin and light as possible because most people like a ring that's barely noticeable when wearing. Which it's a good and a bad thing because then they'll wear it and put it in their gloves while they're working and lose it in their gloves. My husband, I've made several rings for him, needless to say. I do have a sizer, but I don't use it in these. I did, my little 4-year-old, he wanted a ring made, so I did size his because they don't make cores that small. And so I just made his with resin, and for safety's sake, I did cut a hole completely out of it, so it's not going to get stuck on his finger. But I did use a ring sizer to actually get it to the right size. But in what I do for all my custom designs, I don't use them. Yeah, whenever a customer asks how to get their ring sized, that's what I recommend. Go to a jewelry store. You can get some online. I don't recommend it because if it's off, it's not going to be comfortable. It's either going to be too loose and you're afraid you're going to lose it, or it's too tight and it's not comfortable. So I always recommend go to a jewelry store, and some will ask if it's a comfort fit, and that's what I have, are comfort fit bands. They're not completely straight. They do have a bit of a slope to them. And also I've discovered that the wider the ring, the tighter the fit will be. So in this little bitty black ceramic, this is 4 millimeters, and I'm not a fan of it. It is so thin I can't put much in it. And so for my ring, this ring, for me, it's the same black ceramic, but 6 millimeters. And whenever I wear it, it's quite a bit tighter. So I also warn them of that it may be a little bit on the tight side, but so far I haven't had any complaints whenever it comes to fit, which I encourage everyone to let me know. Yes? Well, the question was if I did any of like what they have online, if I take a quarter, punch a hole, and shape it out from that. I'd love to, but I don't have a clue how to do that. And all I do is just based on cores. Eventually I might venture into that, but for now, especially with my more limited experience, this is kind of my comfort zone. But it's always fun to experiment out of the comfort zone. Those are the rings I do that are not custom, is I'm testing something out. I've did some of my own resin casting. I did some with horn. I've done a shark vertebrae, which is really cool, by the way. I did some with antler where I filled it all with resin of a different color, and it's also a neat process. And I just do those as examples because you never know who's going to like it. So I always try to think outside the box. If I see, well, especially in the pen world, there's a million different ways you can make unique pens. And I try to use the same thought process on my rings. It's like, what can I make that is going to be different, that's going to catch someone's eye? Or I can even offer them a matching ring to their pen. And so it's kind of another step up. I do that with these, is offer matching pens.